what has been created over the last few decades as it relates to workforce development and returning citizens, a culture of placement-based initiatives. And one of those is banning the box, expungement, record sealing. Others are things like the work opportunity tax credit. All of these initiatives are noble and they're awesome and they're great. For somebody that's been in the reentry space for 20 years, you would think that I would be doing cartwheels because of those things, and sometimes I do. But they're all driven and built around a placement-based culture. And so let me illustrate, and some of you have heard me say this before, how it kind of works in the real world. I grew up in Appalachia, West Virginia. This is a fact. This is a truth. In a trailer park where a lot of the folks that I grew up with and were around ended up in situations that were quite challenging later in life, like incarceration. My mom was a former addict and had a significant challenge early on in her life. So imagine a person coming out of a poor background in Appalachia. Imagine somebody coming out of Linden or Hilltop. Imagine somebody coming out of addiction. They may have grew up in a nice home, but got an addiction and ended up incarcerated. They go to Organization A post-release, a workforce development nonprofit organization that has a boatload of resources to help that individual to get them placed in a job. That organization is constantly, typically they'll have staff who are actually out there hitting the ground, trying to find conviction-friendly companies and trying to convince them that everybody shows up with a suit and tie, polished, ready. They've gone through our 6-month program. They're going to hit the ground running. Best thing since sliced bread. No doubt they're going to hire the best employer in the world. They got people out there pitching that and selling that to every employer out there that they can. Person A goes to that organization A, they get those supportive services, and they get placed in a job. It's amazing. They're there for 2 months. They encounter a trigger. Let's say they're a former heroin addict. They hit a trigger, boom, relapse, done. What do they do? Well, they might be out, if you're here in Columbus, on Sullivan for a minute or two, and if they can make it to the next organization that provides very similar services, they will, and they'll go to Organization B that gets the same grant funding to get placed again. Company A that hired from Organization A, because the person was there just long enough for them to take advantage of the work opportunity tax credit, gets a tax credit, great. Person A is still without a job, they go to Organization B, they get placed again. Company B gets a tax credit. It's going to happen 2 or 3 times in a year, and over the course of 5 years or a decade, you could have an individual who probably has 30 versions of their resume, has probably participated in 80 mock interviews, has probably seen 26 caseworkers, and probably has worked with DOIS, Department of Family, they've worked with every agency that there is, and they're still without employment. And so we built policies, we banned the box to make it easier for them to get placed in that cycle. So that's part of the reason why I don't do cartwheels, is because it's a placement-based culture, it's not a retention-based culture. And the challenge for us is to educate and empower the business community, especially the business community that has a heart and gets it and wants to do it right, to figure out how to be a better partner in this adventure. Because what we want is we want to see person A land into an opportunity A and hit the ground running, not just sprint style, but marathon style. And in order for that to happen, HR departments within organizations have to think practically, how do they A, adjust, change, encourage, tweak, lead a new cultural initiative within their organization. Now, when you're an organization of 5, relatively easy to do. When you're Ohio Health, not so easy, right? I mean, it's a given in any company in between. But it starts with the HR department, and just a couple of practical things that I would suggest that I've seen that's worked over the years. One is if you are an HR director, think of Kelly for example, start with you. Don't try to change any policies within your organization in the first year. You being here is step 1. Step 2, go and visit a prison. Develop a relationship with folks in prison. Get to know, ask questions, learn as much as you can with the objective of cultivating and building a heart of empathy that's pragmatic. You learn as much as you can so that you, when it comes time to start thinking about changing company policies, you're speaking from a lived experience. That's step one. You as the HR director, do not try to change anything. Certainly don't go sit down with a nonprofit that literally is going to convince you every reason why you need to hire this individual, all right? You've already heard that. You've already heard it. Let's just be real. You've heard it 100 times, right? Don't go to the nonprofit. Go to the source. Go to the prison and talk to folks. Go to the streets and talk to folks and get to know some people. Get to know some stories, some real live stories. I'm not saying don't talk to the nonprofits entirely, right? But you do want to talk to them too. Like, I mean, they're in the business of placing people into employment, right? That's what they're, so, I mean, talk to them and learn from them too. Maybe that was overstated, but you get my point, right? Get into the prisons as an HR person, learn some stories, cultivate that heart of empathy. And then the second thing you do, after you've done that, do that for a year. The second thing that I would encourage you to do is work within your department or within the management team, work with the CEO to introduce them to the idea of doing that exact same thing. Say, hey, you know what? I heard about this guy named Matt Palmer who goes over to Marion Correctional Institution every now and then, and he takes a van load of dudes and dudettes that are like, you know, executives in companies. Like, they go visit these prisons. Latch on to folks like that, right? And so you as the HR person, you take your HR, team, you go over and you talk to your CEO and say, hey, look, I'm thinking about taking a team. And by the way, I've done a little bit of research over this last year. And one of the things I've noticed is, of course, unemployment's really low. And in our state, there's about 53,000 people that are incarcerated, and about 20,000 or so of those folks are going to come out. That doesn't even count our county jail. And so there's a labor force here that might be interesting for us to tap into. And there is this thing called the Work Opportunity Tax Credit that might be interesting. So you start building the case with your CEO, with your immediate supervisor, right? Planting that seed. And do you think you might want to come October 17th and go to prison with me and a couple of my colleagues? Is that cool if we kind of take the day off or the morning off and take a little trip? And you plant that seed. And you'd work on that for about 6 months to a year. I can almost guarantee you that if you do that for 2 years, year and a half, 2 years, you will begin to see a shift in your mindset, your CEO's mindset, your management team's mindset, your manager's mindset. That'll start to spread. That'll start to create a cultural shift, right? If that doesn't happen, frankly, in a lot of companies, if that doesn't happen, it's going to continue to be a repetitive cycle. It's just going to be that way. If 90% of your management team has no idea what it's like to grow up in generational poverty, has never spent a time or know anybody that spent time in prison and is totally clueless and oblivious to that life, managers that don't understand that life, they're not going to be good coaches. And so frankly, I would also say this as a third practical point. As leaders, learning the art of empathy, you want to become a good coach, right? And so as a leader of leaders in the HR department, you want to train your management team on how to coach and to mentor and to lead. Now, that doesn't mean, as a footnote, that we become coddling, that we become passive, right? It also doesn't mean that we become tyrants and extremely belligerent. It just means we learn how to be empathetic. Any good coach learns their players. And when you diversify your team, you learn your players so as to create that right culture. Those are just a couple of practical things that I'm trying to summarize from a little bit longer of a talk. But those are some things I would encourage HR folks to really do. It takes time. It's not going to happen overnight. But it's a lot more than banning the box. We have to think outside of the box. We have to understand the triggers, the challenges. Sure, folks that we interview and folks that we look to hire are ambitious, goal-oriented, etc., but let's keep it real, right? There are a number of folks that are incarcerated for a reason. And that's just a fact. We started a big contract with a customer through She Has a Name Cleaning, just to give you an example of what we deal with as a business. It doesn't happen a lot, but it happens, and it's just keeping it real. We started one of our biggest contracts about a month ago, and in our first month, this is the first time here in Columbus that this has happened, but one of the individuals thought it would be a good idea to take an iPad out of somebody's bag in their office. We're cleaning this facility. Well, you know, technology these days, you can ping the iPad and find out where it's at, and it matched an address that we had on file, and so it wasn't very difficult to find out who it was that took the iPad. So we looked back at the background, we realized that this person has had theft in their background, and they're cleaning a site. And so if you're a business owner, what are you going to think? Why in the world would I ever hire anyone that has as the criminal record the fact that they steal things, and they're going to be in a place where they can steal things? Why would I take that chance? Why would I take that risk? Why? It's a real risk. It's real. It happens, and it happened to us, and it happened to our customer. So how do we deal with that with our customer? How do we deal with that with that individual? And so I can say that after 20 years, we're still learning. And one of the things that we've realized is that typically individuals steal because of their addiction. Individuals that steal to not support an addiction